Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Historic Shepherdstown and the Kentucky Rifle Foundation, I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Donna Bertazzoni, a member of the Historic Shepherdstown Board of Directors. I'm one of the people who worked with Tim Hodges of the Kentucky Rifle Foundation to organize and set up the long rifle exhibit that's currently on display at the Historic Shepherdstown Museum. Unfortunately, Tim can't be with us this morning, but we do have a few people who worked on the exhibit with us. John Cavalunas, who's on our museum committee, Nick Blanton, there he is, Nick Blanton, who's on our museum committee, Wayne Goodrich, who is involved with the museum, Al Levitan, who is on our museum committee, and our building committee. So I want to thank everybody who participated, as well as the people who lent us items for the exhibit. It is my distinct honor to welcome Wallace B. Gusler, who will be speaking to us today about long rifles by the Sheetz family and others. This is the capstone event for our exhibit. It's not often that I have an opportunity to introduce somebody who is as accomplished as Wallace, so bear with me, it's going to take a little time. Okay. Wallace B. Gusler is a collector, scholar, teacher, and consultant on American arms and furniture. He retired from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation after 41 years of service. A native of Virginia, he grew up in the Salem area. An early interest in Virginia's 18th century frontier led him to make a flintlock pistol at the age of 14. In a small shop that he established, Gusler made and repaired rifles for 7 years as a business and a hobby before he joined Colonial Williamsburg in 1962 as an interpreter in the craft shops department. 2 years later, he was promoted to master gunsmith. He was the first person in modern times to recreate all of the traditional processes of making long rifles by hand, including forging the barrel. These processes are recorded in the 1968 documentary film Gunsmith of Williamsburg, which is available to watch on YouTube, and if you haven't, it's actually very interesting. In 1972, Gusler took the new position of curator of mechanical objects, and 2 years later, he was promoted to curator of furniture and arms. Over the next decade, he added major components to Colonial Williamsburg's collection of English and American furniture, as well as European and American arms. During this time, he directed the reinterpretation and refurnishing of these elements in the Governor's Palace. He also refined the Colonial Williamsburg Furniture Conservation Shop, developed a furniture conservation philosophy, established an arms conservation program, and helped design the opening exhibits at the DeWitt Wallace Decorative Arts Museum. In 1985, he transferred to the Department of Conservation, serving in a variety of roles before he became Director of Conservation in 1987. In that role, he developed approaches to the treatments of furniture and upholstery. He and his staff formed one of the strongest furniture conservation programs then in existence, and with this staff, he led the design team in the development of a new Colonial Williamsburg conservation facility. Before retiring, Gusler returned as master of the gunsmith shop, where he supervised the team of skilled artisans who research and make 18th century style firearms and interpret the historic trade. Mr. Gusler has contributed articles to the magazine Antiques. With Dr. James Lavin, he co-authored Decorative Firearms, 1540 to 1870, from the collection of Clay P. Bedford. He served as guest curator of an exhibition entitled Eastern Virginia Furniture at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, which was sponsored jointly with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. The exhibit resulted in his book, Furniture of Williamsburg and Eastern Virginia, 1710 to 1790. With Mark Silver, he co-authored 3 Centuries of Tradition, The Renaissance of Custom Sporting Arms in America, and more recently, he curated the 2022 exhibit, The Long Rifle in Virginia, at the William King Museum of Art in Abingdon, Virginia. Gusler now runs a consulting business, Wallace Gusler Arts, and lectures and teaches on firearms, furniture, carving, historic technologies, and the Virginia frontier. He also continues to make custom long rifles and tomahawks. Today's presentation is going to be broken into two parts, not quite equal in length. The first section is going to be longer. First, Wallace is going to talk about Virginia rifles, focusing on the Sheetz family and their rifles. Then after a break, and we will have cookie and water and still coffee and donuts outside, he will present a workshop discussion about gunsmithing. And you can see on the table there he has some stocks and things to show. A couple of brief housekeeping notes. As you may have already discovered, restrooms are in the lobby. Men's room is on the left. Women's room is on the right. No food is allowed in the auditorium, but obviously you've got your coffee and water. If you do have coffee and water, please, when you leave, make sure you take your containers with you. There are trash cans outside. We do have a recycling can out there for the water bottles. And last but not least, if you have not had a chance to see the long rifle exhibit at the historic Shepherdstown Museum, please walk over after the lecture here. The museum is open until 5 o'clock today. We have some flyers out in the lobby about the rifles that are in them. There are more flyers in the museum itself, and there's also walking directions to the museum. It's about 5-6 minute walk from here. So, okay, now, Wallace. Okay, and we are going to turn off the lights. And so just be careful if you are heading out. The door on my right is open back there, okay? All right, let me get down. Okay. It's all open.
Good morning. I want it to be very dark because the guns show up better and focus well on those. I'll be talking about the Shepherdstown School first, since we're in Shepherdstown. And you might wonder why I brought a couple pieces of pottery over there. One is a teapot with Queen Charlotte. It's 1762 to 65. And this town was originally called Mecklenburg. That's where she's from. It was after Queen Charlotte. She married George III in 1762. And so Charlottesville in Virginia, Mecklenburg County, Charlotte in North Carolina, all these were named after her. So I thought it was appropriate to have the teapot. The other one is a salt glazed beer mug. And I think that that one's interesting because it's Admiral Vernon's victory at Portobello on the Isthmus of Panama in 1739. That put the British in charge of the Atlantic and all that trade coming out of Spain and so forth. And Lawrence Washington, George's half-brother, served under Vernon and got a commendation for bravery from Admiral Vernon, and that's why he called his house Mount Vernon. And so George inherited it from his older brother. So we were very connected with a lot of British history as well as Germanic. I'm trying to figure out this changer here. It's real small and I have unfortunately big thumbs. This is the earliest representation that I'm aware of a Virginia rifleman, 1778. Sketched by a British officer, and at the top it says a Virginia rifleman. And it's sketchy, but it shows the frontier outfit. And with the help of Eve Ottmeyer, who's helping me today, we worked on identifying all the development of the frontiersman's outfit. The hunting shirt, which is probably the most classic feature of it, developed in the area between Augusta County, down through to New River. The earliest references to it do date to the French and Indian War. For many years, everyone thought that the hunting shirt came after the French and Indian War. And most of the earliest references are associated with William Preston's company, who was running frontier forts all along the chain during the French and Indian War. And so, and our research now is trying to go back earlier than 1759, but it's kind of hard to track something that doesn't have a specific name. So that's a little tough. But at any rate, we get the hunting shirt title in one document in 1759. A sergeant who was working, his work was under William Preston's control, and he died out near McDowell, Virginia. If you know that area, it's now West Virginia. So the frontiersman's outfit is part, as Joseph Doddridge put, it's part civilized or part of the uncivilized nations, as they treated the Indians. And the hunting shirt, with all the references to it, it's open before and overlaps. A lot of reenactors today use pullover hunting shirts, and if they're doing so, there's no documentation for it at all. And I think they would make it much tougher to ride a horse, for instance, with some of those that go down to your knees. But the open before solves that problem. But at any rate, so he's not wearing his hair in a queue. That's odd to me, because that usually happened. But I think that if you look at the way his hair is swept back, having worn a queue for like 20 years or 30 years of my life, when you take that garter off the queue, it often leaves an angle like that. And he does not have garters at his knees, which they usually did, but he may well have lost those in the campaign. You know, you lose things in a war campaign. But you see the shot bag and powder horn on his right side. The horn and bag are put together. The horn sits right over the bag flap, keeps it closed. And that's a frontier development as far as I know. It happened on the American frontier. I've never seen a prototype like that in Europe. They usually are separated. And in New England, certainly the shot bag was on one side and the powder horn on the other. I think this developed on the frontier as an emergency. You leave your house quickly in a campaign, you grab one strap and you've got everything to operate that rifle. Your house may not be there when you come back, or your camp that you ran out of. So, and they kept the bullet mold in that pouch as well. And that's the only set of pliers that the frontiersman has that he can. I've seen a couple ramrods where they were stuck in the barrel and they used a bullet mold to pull it out. I've also seen a lot of teeth marks on those. So, but anyway, you'll see that he has the powder horn is marked death or liberty. And typical of most artists, they often get that powder horn plug, the wooden part, much bigger and out of scale. That's often that way. And then he's got a U.S. canteen, so you know he's not a Tory in a frontier outfit. So we'll move on. The red dots up here, Shepherdstown's on the river, Potomac River. And the next red dot down is roughly where Winchester is. And then Hans Jacob Honaker's shop is the next dot, which is on really near Front Royal, 7 miles from Front Royal. And then we'll go down to Woodstock, looking at some rifles made there. This is the earliest signed rifle from Virginia, as far as I know. We're judging its age by the style of it because it's not dated, but it's signed Philip Sheetz. Probably one of his relatives, John Sheetz in Stanton, first advertised his shop as as John Sheetz. I think the Scotch-Irish guys probably got a little humor out of that. And so he changes his name to Sheetz, S-H-E-E-T-S, whereas in the northern parts of the family, it's usually signed with a Z, S-H-E-E-T-Z, in the federal period. So this is his early German signature. This rifle is in a Duke's collection in England, only because of the generosity of an English curator do I even know about it and got pictures from it, because it's not open to the public and not really accessible. I have a fantasy about this rifle that it may have been George Merchant's rifle. He was in Morgan's Rifle Company, captured before they attacked Quebec on the outskirts of Quebec, hauled off to England, and was treated finely by the English. They really thought he was an interesting fellow, as his dress. They made the mistake of having him do a shooting match, which didn't help their recruitment much. So, and he returned to Virginia. I don't know the Shepherdstown Company. I don't know what their survival rate was, but in Morgan's company, only 7 of those 97 guys come back to Virginia alive. It was a tough war. This is the wooden patch box, the German feature, which in America, we seem to have invented the hinged box that you carry patches in to replace that wooden door. Or our earliest rifles typically have that. This rifle is in almost complete perfect condition. DeWitt Bailey, the Englishman who helped me, the American Englishman, he's an American who moved to England and has lived there since. He helped me with getting these pictures. He said it was like it was just come off the pegs of the gunsmith's shop, off the pegs of his rack. It's the original flintlock. It's complete to the muzzle, and has incised carving behind the cheek piece. The cheek piece is where you rest your cheek in firing. Shotguns are what they called fowling pieces at the time. Or on the Virginia frontier, it's just called a gun. And these are called in the records in Virginia rifle guns. The term rifle starts to stand on its own in the late 18th century without the gun with it, but through most of the early period, it's a rifle gun in the wills and inventories. And down the Shenandoah Valley and on some of the Virginia Piedmont, the proportion of smoothbores is like 2 to 1 over rifle gun ownership in the wills and inventories. It took about 40 years with the help of a lot of graduate students, but we surveyed all those records from the beginning of it's 144 will books in Augusta County alone, so you can imagine what an immense job that is to read every page and get every gun, knife, tomahawk, and all that. That's where I got those statistics. Interestingly, about half of the rifle gun references, the guy also owns a smoothbore. Like a farmer today, he's got a shotgun and a rifle, and it was that same way in the 18th century. Now, there's a floating population that a lot of the frontiersmen are that they aren't covered much by the wills and inventories, because you'll get names in the musters of the muster rolls that you can't find them out necessarily in the landowners. And so that floating population, I learned about those guys because of the summonses of the court for debt. So you can find about them. And during the French and Indian War, there are counties out there that in Augusta County Court, the sheriff won't go there. He'll put on it not served for fear of the Indians. But those guys come in and sue each other over minor things. It's amazing that they're going in and out of the Indian war zone. And so out in the Jackson River, we found one inventory that had a cow wounded by an arrow, and another guy who had half interest in an Indian scalp. Virginia passed a law in 1755, 10 pounds for all male Indian scalps above the age of 12. Unanimous vote in Williamsburg of the council. They really didn't care whether it was a male, female, or a child. By the time of the French and Indian War, the war over their land had so changed Americans across the board that scalping was a legitimate rule of war. That tells you how much effect the cost of the land was to the white culture. And so the fellow who had half ownership in the scalp, and Mr. Byrd, who was dead, the court bought out his half of it to settle the estate. This has a nicely engraved hind sight. They didn't call it a rear sight, they called it a hind sight, and the hind may be a corruption of the German word for deer. That's really, and often you find them, and there's his beautiful signature cut in real deep. Time takes away a lot of those signatures, and so we would have more signed rifles. The ones that are advertised for lost or stolen during the Revolution in the newspapers, more of them are signed than the average ones that you find today that have, by happenstance, survived through this time. Americans use these up as a usable tool, and they don't survive in many numbers. It's got really strong architecture. You see the triangle shaped by the comb of the stock, and the wrist extends back in. And it flares a lot at the tail of the lock toward the barrel because the barrel is tapered. And so that heavy, thick stock makes the gun have better balance. Later they get thin and they're really barrel heavy. But many of those later long rifles are made for target shooting more than for hunting or for warfare. The Sheetz family Philip Sheetz got orders for rifles that were made, and he advertised in the paper in Pennsylvania for gunsmiths. And we'll be looking at another Sheetz rifle that has the same carving in front of the comb that one has. This one is a short rifled gun, and it fits the exact description of General Lee's ad in the Virginia Gazette that young gentlemen should form themselves into cavalry companies and use a short rifled gun and a fold-up spear, and that they should do it at their own expense and volunteer for the Army. And this one, I think, is one of those rifles. It's got the short, it's got the sling swivels, and also General Lee did make a payment to Philip Sheetz. And it's got carving related to the sign Philip Sheetz, so that's the attribution of this. This is another one that's in virtually perfect condition. The patch box is really beautifully done. One thing that's been repaired is the door. The door of the patch box. The engraving you can see is different, a different hand, and there's a copper patch, so it was a reused piece of brass. The rifle makers had to use reused brass, so for their casting of the trigger guards and butt plates, they bought scrap brass, and there was a sub-economy of scrap brass, because it's really not until the federal period after the Revolution that the British are sending brass here. The brass they send in the colonial period is finished product. They didn't want us making guns or anything else. They wanted us to send the raw materials there, and then they would send back products. That was the colonial system. And by the way, each colony has a different rate for the value of the English pound. It's an important thing for any of you doing research to know about. Reverse of this one, it does not have carving behind the cheek. It has a lower butt molding in relief and carving around the breech tang, and the side plate is beautifully engraved. That engraving reminds me a lot of needlework in style, and sometimes I wonder if the gunmaker's wife might have drawn up those patterns in these early makers. Most of the immigrant makers, if they came to America, they brought one aspect of gun making because it was broken into separate trades in Europe. So you might have been a carver, a gunstock carver. You might have been a gunstock shaper or doing the architecture and so forth. And London, by the time of the 1720s, was 22 separate trades to make one gun. Even making the ramrod was a separate trade. So they come over here in America, what do you got to do? You got to do the whole thing. And so you find some that you can tell that they were learning to engrave as they went along, and some didn't even try. And some, when they did try, you might have wished they hadn't. But this engraving is well executed, but the design is not the typical Rococo period that you would expect. Baroque and Rococo. The flintlock is in original condition and in great shape. And I've only seen two long rifles that had the full slings on them. Others have there are many of them that do have sling swivels, but they don't survive. Later hunters don't want them, and George Shumway, when he did his 2 volumes on the rifle in colonial America, every time it had a sling swivel or the hole for it, he said it was military. That's not true. I mean, lots of sporting arms had slings in Europe and in America. But if it was a Virginia rifle, the law says that if you're between 16 and 60, you're in the militia. And so pretty much all the rifles owned in Virginia were secondarily military arms. And during the war, before the war, you provided your own arm and you could be fined for not providing yourself. The law said that if you were too poor, that they would provide you a gun. But apparently the rulers of Virginia never found anybody that was that poor, because they kept fining them. And they fined you for not having the powder and not coming to muster and so forth. And the dread and aggravation for them is always our treasure, because because they get fined, you find out where they are sometimes, right? So one man's treasure is another man's trash, and vice versa. So that's a wonderful rifle. And this shell carving, a lot of modern people who study long rifles, they'll say, well, that looks like a Redding rifle. And in fact, it does. It also looks like about 10,000 British rifles, British fowling pieces that came to America. And it's a very generic pattern. And in the British trade guns that came, there were variations of this shell that had no veining in it. It was the simplest. And then it went up to very complex. And a little bit later, we'll be looking at a Honaker rifle that they copied the more complex one. But that's British generic designs and they're repairing these guns in their shops all the time. They're getting to handle those imported pieces. Why are they imported? They're cheaper than you can make it in America. The rifle was exotic enough that there was no real prototype made in Europe. But if the war hadn't happened before the end of the 18th century, they probably would have put all the gun makers out of business in America, because they can do it cheaper. Labor is cheaper in Europe. They've got broken down into all those trades. And so, as Washington put it, when Philip Bell, he thought overcharged him for a box, he said that this kind of work was very dear, meaning it was expensive in America, but it wasn't as expensive as what Bell was charging him. So he also accused them of sending things that were in their ware rooms that were out of style, they couldn't sell otherwise, so they sent them off to America. And that's a great truth in that, actually, because there are other cases, documentary from the period that you can prove that happened. So the trigger guard is beautifully filed up, and you can see the sling swivel in front on the trigger guard, and nice moldings on the ends of the trigger guard. That brass would have been formerly shoe buckles, broken candlesticks, all kinds of pieces of brass that they had to buy and scrap together. And I think sometimes those things had solder joints that they just threw them in there anyway, and then that changes the alloy of the brass, and it'll be more red in some instances That's good, strong yellow brass. The button behind the screw that holds the top of the butt plate, that's the push button that springs open the patch box door. The spring open door developed slowly. I brought a rifle here that's Hans Jacob Honaker's. We have the original here. I'll be showing you pictures of it in a few minutes. But it has no kick-out spring, and it's transitional where they hadn't developed that yet. And I have a black and white of that so you can see that carving in front of the comb. Whoops. Let me see if I can go back on this. If you look at the carving down there, I was trying to get this right here. Those are identical, and they have that in common with the signed Phillips Sheetz. It's a very personal kind of thing. We don't often get to see an early rifle with the original muzzle cap. Often those fore ends are broken and repaired and lost. And I've seen originals that had as many as 4 or 5 repairs to those fore ends. And so this one also has what looks like a very early ramrod with its original brass cap. And so that's the foresight, and then you have the hindsight. You can see the rifling. They usually file those grooves deeper right in the muzzle like that so that it looked more bold on the front. But for those of you not familiar with rifling, it's a spiral groove that's cut inside the barrel to make the bullet spin, and therefore it will have accuracy. Shotguns and military muskets were smooth and did not have any real controllable accuracy. They were good at short range, but with this kind of rifle, they were hitting man-sized targets up to 300 yards. In some cases, they claimed 400 yards. And the British were astonished at it. One British officer wrote about nearly getting killed by, he really admired the American rifle, and he collected a lot of them, Major Hanger, and gave them to the Royal Collection. So we have some that weren't used up on the Virginia frontier. And I think that the Phillips Sheetz, I don't know, both of those might have come out of England. We don't know. A lot of American pieces turn up in England, a lot more than you would think. Martin Sheetz, Philip's son, inherited the business. He's got a fabulous inventory in the records. I was recently looking at it anew, and I was surprised to find that he had a mockingbird in a cage. I thought that was fascinating. And a lot of fishing gear and nets, so living on the river, that was part of their income. And he had a lot of other pretty strong inventory. He was doing well. He had 62 carving chisels. 62 carving chisels. I don't know how many people he was employing, but that's a lot. I don't use nearly that many, and I do a lot of carving on lots of things and for many different processes. But he was doing well, and he made a beautiful rifle, and his engraving is, I think, much more sophisticated than his father's. Beautiful patch box. The outline is formed by the Rococo scrolls with the engraving. A nice carving coming off at the wrist. Beautiful carving behind the cheek underneath. And that hunter star, that Shepherdstown star is distinctive with very small, you've got the 4 strong points, and then the other points are weaker. Many other stars will be different. So it's details like that that help identify shop traditions and set them apart from others. And I won't go through all of those little details, but he did fine carved and engraved rifles. John Jacob, his brother. By the time of by the time of Martin's inventory, John Jacob is living in the home, the original home, and Martin's in a different household. And Philip's will makes provisions for the one younger child that was, and divides up the estate pretty well. Good documentation on this shop, series of shops actually. John Jacob made a rifle that was in the Battle of New Orleans. And it was relief carved. And that company at the Battle of New Orleans wore blue hunting shirts, the whole company. And when the British captured a couple of those guys, they were astonished that they were doctors and lawyers and not trained soldiers. But they held that one line and took a redoubt that kept the Brits from getting in behind the lines and flanking it. And they took a heavy toll with those rifles. And the original rifle was signed by the son of Captain Ross in the 1830s on a patchbox door that he used it in the battle. And years ago, it was out on the market. And more recently, the man who owned it got raided by the ATF. And they said it was stolen from the collection in New Orleans. The museum has not proved yet that they did or did not have it or sell it. And so I think that the man that owned it was, I think he lost about $30,000 there plus court costs. So be careful what you buy and what, you know. But I don't think that they ever shown that they had ownership. But you know, a lot of museums wouldn't have. Some museums have good records and others don't, and so, and of course, some curator may have sold it legitimately out into the public. That happens too. Some curators come in, they like one thing, and they get rid of a lot of other things, instead of looking at the overall museum. A variation of what you see in Martin's work, and that's to be expected. But some of these rifles show some influence of Lancaster periods, particularly Isaac Haynes. So I think a journeyman was down there who brought some of those designs. That happens, and some makers will pick up other designs from a gun that they repaired. That's hard to prove, but sometimes you can see that because it's exact from another maker at a great distance. William Inn's work is very much that quality. He's in the later period when carving is diminishing and inlays are taking over the design. And that's the change from carved furniture to inlaid furniture in the decorative arts. All of their rifles tend to be very well designed and have really good art and form. The double set triggers, for those of you not familiar with them, the back trigger, you pull it and it sets it separately from the flintlock. And then the front trigger is called a hair trigger because you can adjust it to just have the slightest touch to fire the gun. And it's separate mechanism to make it safer. Those set triggers go all the way back pre-firearms to crossbows in Europe. Ancient tradition. Ancient tradition by American standards. Ancient in Europe means something quite different from what we think is ancient. And you see the Federal Eagle beautifully engraved. Side plate is well engraved. The side plate is the washers for those two screws that hold the flintlock. We've got Michael Sheetz in Charlestown. I don't know his exact relationship to the family. Some things have been published, but sometimes I don't see good enough evidence to be sure. And Michael Sheetz work, especially that inlay you see on the cheek piece, is related to George Peterman in Botetourt County. That's a pretty great distance. But if you look in the tax records down there, there's a Sheetz family from the 1780s on, and all the classic names are there. Henry, Frederick, and so on. And so I don't know. And also the finial, the patchbox, that version was used by George Peterman and Botetourt, and the Lauck sons used a similar pattern. And so there's a lot to be unraveled in all this. I think Michael Sheetz was making the flintlocks for Frederick Sheetz when he was in Hampshire County with state contracts. Because as soon as 1815, when the state contracts are terminated, Michael Sheetz advertises in the paper and sells a set of lock-making tools. And so I think Frederick Sheetz had subbed that out. I don't know that for a fact, but it looks like circumstantially that's what's going on. But Frederick Sheetz, we'll get to him in a little bit, but he was producing a lot of rifles. This is signed Sheetz and Clark. It's one of the finest long rifles of that early 19th century period. And the Michael Sheetz, I think, certainly made that cheek piece inlay. The carving is slightly slimmer and stretched out, but it's a design that occurs again and again in John Armstrong's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So Mr. Clark had some association either with John Armstrong or someone else who had learned from him. There's a connected chain there in the art. And these fellows were probably, at some point, many of them are going in and out of Harper's Ferry and learning new techniques. And Harper's Ferry served as a melting pot of design for these gunsmiths. So the epicenter of the new developments in long rifle design shifts from Pennsylvania down to the Potomac River drainage. Here, Winchester, this area, Hagerstown, and those shops are now the more innovative and inventing new designs. Fabulous rifle. I wish I knew where this early rifle is. It was pictured in Bill Bowers's book, and it was in the Kindig collection, but I never saw it when in the Kindig collection when I was visiting there in the 60s, so it must have headed out. But it's a really fine early rifle, and it has some of the origins of the early development in the northern Shenandoah Valley. This family moved to Cumberland, Maryland, and then a branch of them went to Kentucky and established a school there of long rifles made in Kentucky. So a typical frontier family moving out. Each new apprentice wants to go out and get a new market. This one I did get to handle, was in the Kindig collection. Really nice carving. His carving is better than his engraving, and that's how it works sometimes. Okay, this rifle is on the rack. We can look at it later. It's an important Virginia rifle for a number of reasons. I guess number one, it's the only one with a brass barrel that's made in America. And that's the only one that survives from the 18th century. There are document references to them, but there are 3 or 4 document references. And 2 of those document references, the gun was ordered, we don't know from whom, but he ordered it. He was in Pittsburgh and ordered it for an Indian chief gift. Often, head Indians got the better rifles than the frontier guys because they're sometimes to seal a treaty or just to get favoritism And of course, they liked great arms, you know. It was their daily life. So this one, Hans Jacob Honaker, was from Switzerland. He left in 1748 with his young son, 1-year-old son and wife. He arrived in Philadelphia alone. They died coming across the Atlantic. Horrible conditions in those ships. As many as 100 people jammed in there, and very bad food. And when they get to Philadelphia, only a few might have the money to pay for the passage, so they are dentured. They are marched down to the courthouse and swear the oath to the king and march back to the ship. They don't leave the ship until they're sold. The captain owns them for a 4-year indenture. So you'll see ads in the paper that says, you know, a carpenter and a this and that. They don't even give them names. And so you stay on that ship until you're sold. And Hans Jacob served a full 4 years as a carpenter in Philadelphia. He got married in Philadelphia to a German woman. He's missing for 5 years. And in 1758, he buys land north of Frederick, Maryland. And he's again called a carpenter. He was a gun stocker as well. But I think he did not say he was a gun stocker, particularly when he left Germany. If you say you're a gun stocker, you're in the army now. They won't let you leave. You can't leave those countries without permission. And Hans Jacob and his wife and child waited a year before they got an audience to apply for export. It was just really tough world. And when you moved out of your canton, you lost all the things gained by military service of your family going back, so you started back as a serf. So it was a huge risk to leave, huge risk. I think the candidate for where that barrel was made is Isaac Zane's furnace, south of Winchester, on Cedar Creek. Isaac Zane was a Quaker who set up a iron furnace, a very profitable iron furnace, and Dan Morgan worked a lot for him hauling iron to Fredericksburg in the pre-war period. So Isaac Zane had a state-of-the-art mill, ironworks, and he became friends with Jefferson. He was a captain in the militia, and then later I think had another higher rank. And so when a diarist went through there, he called him a Quaker for the times, meaning that he was a Quaker when it was convenient, and when it wasn't convenient, he had a common law wife, and that didn't go over well with the Quakers either. His son, Zanesville, Ohio, is named after his son, and his son didn't get any inheritance because they weren't married. So this has the simplest patch box you can put together. It's got an astragal arch, which, and with the engraving and the carving around it, forms the basic of a raised panel door, like in a desk and bookcase or a house and so forth. And it's a transitional patch box. This is dated 1771 by the maker. It's got DO 1771 engraved on the inside of the patch box, and O Domini of the make. The DO is just a quick way to say that. The cheek piece is gigantic and huge, like this by German standards would be about 1710. But these people come from provincial areas, and it's a very difficult stock to shape. It's one of the most sophisticated ones of the long rifles. And many details on this. He may have gone to Lancaster and worked there before the Frederick, Maryland. Or if his wife lived halfway across the Atlantic, he had to serve another 4 years. Who decides halfway? The captain, right? The ship's captain. These are landlocked people. You can imagine them being on the high ocean. They say some of them went berserk and jumped overboard in storms, and it really was one there is a publication of a guy who experienced this, and in that particular ship he was on, 37 children died. If a woman died in childbirth, they threw the baby out. And, if the woman died but the child lived, nobody there to nurse it. On this lower and right next to the notch for the latch, you can see the DO. I think I can see it from here, but I know where it is. And this one never had the kick-out spring. Second rifle from the shop, the same shop, about 1775. This one we're dating by style, so it's during the Revolution, I think. The British Lauck would say that. One thing that I really like about this one, behind the cheek piece, he's got a vase with flowers, tulips. How many dower chests might he have made in Switzerland before coming to America, being a carpenter and a gunstocker? And so several of his sons followed the dual trades, built houses, and to date we have 14 rifle makers in the family, and they've spread through Southwest Virginia and into Ohio as well. Hans Jacob moved to Wythe County in about 1791 or 2. He bought the land out there earlier, but in the 1790 tax records for Shenandoah County, it was Frederick County when he moved, but Shenandoah was cut out. But in 1790, he had 25 free white males above the age of 16. It's the biggest family I've ever seen recorded in one instance in Virginia. Now, we know the great plantation owners had many, many children, but for a tradesman, there must be a lot of in-laws, and apprentices would be counted too if they're above 16. And so, and a lot of times when you go to the tax records, you can find, like with Frederick Sheetz, we'll talk about that later more, but you can find that when the guy's listed in its first tax records, and he's a gunsmith, and he's 16 years old, that usually means to me he apprenticed to his father. And by the time he gets to be 16, often the father and son are not getting along too well. And since he started as a little child in that shop, he would have learned all he needed to learn by the time he would be 16. I lived through one example of that, and later the father thanked me for teaching the son for 2 or 3 years during his teen years because they couldn't get along. I won't say who it is, but some of you may know. And he's in Pennsylvania now making fine rifles. But distinctive features on like the chip carving, these flutes and chip carving, that's folk art. It's not academic. So his stocks are very academic in shape, the architecture, but not the ornament is borrowed from folk art. So he probably went down the street and saw the guy's carving when he did the gun stocking part in Switzerland. Then he goes to the carvers next after you finish the stocking, and so on until the whole gun is finished and also there they would be doing the engraving. Now this side plate on this example is replaced. I'm going to see if I can hit this button right here. It's dated 1789, and it's J. Mood. I think it's A. Mood. I looked those guys up, and I don't know why they replaced that side plate, but they did remodel part of the gun at that time. They added a hook breech, which is a technical thing I won't go into, and they also added draw loops, as they call them. Modern guys call them wedges that hold the barrel, but it originally was held with round pins. So they upgraded it, and so I found number 3 Andrew Moody's in Augusta County. And the earliest one, 1768, there's a father, a son, and an uncle. And in 1789, one moved to Tennessee, and I think he had that overhauled, and underneath that side plate, there's a nicely shaped chisel echo of the original side plate, which had the wings coming off and was very graceful. So you don't often find an informative thing like that. So all repairs aren't bad, but many of them are. There's a close-up of that. And the vine and berry on the molding down there, the serpentine line with the berries on it, that's on the rifle, the early rifle as well, and the relief around the butt plate. Very, very, you don't like to use the term unique, but very rare. This is the toe, and he's got that chip carving all the way from the trigger guard. This is the forerunner of a brass plate that extends that. And so there are 2 or 3 forerunners in the Shenandoah County, and that developed in Shenandoah County. So it moved north into Pennsylvania some, and hugely down the Shenandoah Valley into the Carolinas and down to Georgia, following the migration. Beautiful detail. I don't like to try to have to lay that out. It's because that toe's tapered too, so it's hard to lay out and not getting it wandering around, which doesn't work well. This is a more sophisticated British shell, and the folk art carving on the original 1771 rifle, I was shocked to see how much they had adapted to this British pattern. But you can see how the shell folds back and the scrolls, and it's a very elegant pattern. A lot of wear, but it still shows that it's an elegant pattern around this breech tang. And right up in the corner, you can see a little square. That's part of the original squared tang that preceded. So that tang with the wood screw holds that breech. This is his last son, Abraham Honaker. He had a big shop in what's now Pulaski County, and many of the traits of the earlier rifle, the profile, for instance, with the step at the trigger guard and the slight Roman nose profile, and the Honaker family, they do sort of satisfactory engraving, but it never got great through all the generations. It was pretty good, but not great. But this gun features a lot of, you see, that bird we always called a turkey. The Pennsylvanians call it a distal fink. It's the bird looking where it's been and all that. I'm not sure that that's very old tradition. But anyway, you can see he's got a silver head on the brass. But within the family now, we found at least 2 rifles. One had a fish in the claws, and the other one had another bird, so they see it as an eagle or a hawk, regardless of what we thought. The outside laps on the hinge is another feature and there are 3 rivets in this door hinge lap, like from the early shop. In the Winchester, Shenandoah area, they started the practice of putting silver inlays on or in the relief carving. That seems to originate in Winchester, and then it gets accelerated in Shenandoah County. And Abraham Honaker went another step and domed the inlays to match the carving. This is the most elaborate rifle by him. And altogether, there's about a body of 35 rifles that are now known from the sequence of those shops. recently one turned up from Ohio that had a slight variation of that bird, and it was one of the boys that moved out there that was there and documented in the 1850 census, still practicing gun work. I envy that piece of curly maple. That's the finest striped piece of curly maple I've probably ever seen in my life. This is the earliest Winchester rifle, attributed to Adam Haymaker for reasons of his son's work. And this is the only rifle that is legitimately in Kentucky exploration before the Revolution. Hancock Taylor owned this rifle, and he's related to Zachary Taylor. And he was with the expedition of surveyors that went down the Kanawha River into Kentucky. And John Floyd was in charge of the whole group, but there were several other groups that were under him. And when they got to the mouth of the Kanawha, a diarist who was in just a regular soldier in that group, he said that they found 26 people there on where the Kanawha goes in the Ohio. He said some of them were there to cultivate the land, others were there to attend to the surveyors, and others were there for exploring. And he said there was a man who could speak the Indian language, and Mr. Floyd asked him he would pay him to be a guide, and he refused to be a guide and said, "Take care of your hair." You know what that means, right? And so he informed them that the Shawnee had conferenced and decided to whip and rob the Pennsylvanians and kill the Virginians anywhere they met with them. Yeah. And so back in the 60s when I first read that, I thought, how do they tell the difference between Pennsylvanians and Virginians? The hunting shirt. We now can document that you don't go into Indian Territory in a hunting shirt, but Virginians still do. And most of the time, they're not interested in camouflage. They're saying, "We're here. What the hell are you going to do about it?" Very arrogant. So Virginians were much more active in taking up land. Another beautiful piece of curly maple. The British Lauck is a replacement, but it was an original that was found that fit without any cuts at all. And that's how, like many of those British Laucks were manufactured under very controlled systems with forging dies and all that made them virtually sometimes interchangeable. Of the early rifles we have, more set triggers are found in the Shenandoah Valley than typically in Pennsylvania, pre-revolutionary period. This is one of them that have the set triggers, a much more expensive rifle because of that. And I think that's Adam Haymaker's monogram. Adam Haymaker bought his lot in 1753 in Winchester. And for those of you who study rifles, and like Jacob Dickert is the real big name in early Pennsylvania, that's 6 years before Dickert starts his apprenticeship. So there are rifle makers all over before the rifle's fully developed. So it was undergoing in a large cultural range, not one place and gradually spreading to others like the story has been for many years. It's a big cultural happening. The second rifle from the Hans Jacob Honaker shop had the push button release. I've never seen one constructed that way because he got an order without being trained. If you follow me? If you take Kindig's theory, every one of those things should be all connected. It's more like I call it apprenticeship trees. You know, like a family tree, but it's the apprenticeship that the guys are moving out. And so we've got 12 or 15 different exotic ways patch boxes were made. So the idea of the facility of the patch box and popularity spread through the backcountry much faster than apprenticeships could have distributed. So lots of people are inventing patchbox, both design on the outside where the door opens sideways up this way, or weirdly the other way sometimes. But at any rate, all this stuff needs to be rewritten. But Adam Haymaker's rifle is a very elegant example, especially the architecture. It's just beautifully shaped. And there's the early rifle on top. There's a chip out of that, but if you look at the carving at the end of that, it's a scroll over another layer. And then there's 3 tattered shells. Sometimes it's details like that. And then this was a flame feature here that went off, but it goes under the inlay. And a lot of people will say, well, that inlay is replaced, but the 2 signed John Haymakers we have are made the same way, so they just saw it as overlapping. And I think they carved it before they inlaid it. But you can see those three shells and the scroll over this flame-like feature. It's details like that that are very useful. John Haymaker, about 1785. He apparently invented this segment of the hinge right here. You push that backwards and it springs the door open. In Pennsylvania, you'll find it in a few of the shell rifles in Hanover, and they did a different construction on it, but there's none of them as early as this rifle. And there's some other parallels there. I don't know whether they knew each other or sometimes you just don't have a clue how this stuff distributed. This carved side, very bold carving. That's a repair to a break. Unfortunately, we don't know the form of that side plate. That's an old repair. You can see the carving behind the tang, and still it's a pretty thick buttstock. The 2 John Haymaker rifles that survive with this clean signature have document a very strange tradition. Okay. Both these rifles, one currently is in Shenandoah County. The other one is out near Abingdon, Virginia, out in the wilderness out there. Both of them have no connection in family at all, but in the family, it descended to the firstborn daughter. Now, I've never heard of the rifle descending to the firstborn daughter, but in both these cases, that was true. And in my life, it has traveled one time that way. Each rifle has, in the life I've been tracking them. I found out about one of these through putting an ad in the paper, looking for stuff. Back then, people would contact you. If you did that today, they'd try to shoot you probably. But anyway, beautiful rifles. The Haymaker family set the artistic base for Simon Lauck's shop. I got this attributed to Haymaker. There were several apprentices that Haymaker had in the 1750s and 60s that stayed in Winchester. It could be one of their work. Some of his apprentices went out near Pittsburgh. Some of them went down the valley to Augusta County. And that's just a few that we can trace, and probably a lot more. About every 7 years, somebody's leaving, if you run your business right. Simon Lauck was 16 years old when he marched off in Morgan Rifle Company. He appears not to have made it to Boston, but probably stopped off with family members in what's now Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. And in 1785, he's listed as a gunsmith in Lebanon County. I think he was probably apprenticed to the Haymakers before he left. And, you know, they might have released him from the indenture to go to the war. But at any rate, so he comes back to Winchester in 1787 and immediately takes on 4 apprentices. John Sheetz from Augusta County, Henry Harding from Shenandoah County, Jacob Funk from Shenandoah County, and the other fellow who went out to Pittsburgh later on, I can't remember I don't know where he's from, but anyway. So I think that Simon Lauck's brother, Philip, may have arranged a lot of this for him. Philip was successful and owned the Red Lion Tavern in Winchester. Philip was by profession a potter, and they were very, very closely related families from Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And so there's some evidence that the Haymaker family, that Adam Haymaker probably came from the family up there. And then later, John Haymaker, a blacksmith, comes to Winchester from the same family, Adam's brother. And so you end up with about 6 or 7 John Haymakers. It was a nightmare for your research, if you know what I'm saying. But the Haymaker, I forgot to say that, they were Lutherans, and in the Lutheran church records in Winchester, they've got Haymaker, alias Haymaker on those names. You don't often find that cited like that. It's really good to find it. So, you know, when they come in at Philadelphia, some guy interprets their name in English, and then they're sort of stuck with it. That's the way it seemed to work. Anyway, this shop produced uniformly fantastic rifles. This is one of the really nice ones. It's had a little rough life, and it was clean. Sometimes when they're cleaned, you can see the work better. But notice down at the toe, there's a seam there that he was short of wood on that blank, and he just glued a piece in, and it's still there. Beautiful silver wire. This shop seems to be the origin of that pattern where you have the loops, 8 loops around the 8-pointed star, and also they call this typically they call that that's a silver. They call this a pick holder. It actually held an awl, which is a pretty serious thing. I finally found one intact, and in Winchester, the powder horns had the touch hole pricker in the end of the stopper that stops it, because I found a contract for that during the 1808 contract period. So that was very helpful to find that out. But that awl, it's on a John Sheetz one that's in England that has Prince Frederick's coat of arms on the thumb piece. And we don't know how was that a gift to the George III's son. And there was a second John Sheetz rifle that I purchased for the Colonial Williamsburg. It's on exhibit. That's very elaborately, much more elaborate than this rifle, and they're almost mates. And it came out of England, but the silver escutcheon had been filed off. It had no engraving on it. So probably when it left a royal family, they cut that off. They often do that. So intriguing. Each one of those apprentices pulled full 7 years. You'll read about apprenticeships in America being shorter and all that, but in the gun making, they pulled a full 7 years. So those boys, we'll be looking at a piece or two about some of those apprentices that moved out. It was very rare for long rifles to have fully engraved trigger guards like this, but it was standard in the Lauck shop and many other shops in the Shenandoah Valley. If you read Kindig's book, there's a few Pennsylvania rifles sporadically that have it, and he praises them highly, but it became a standard feature. And the tailpiece on the thimbles that hold the ramrod is usually engraved as well. And there's your full-length toe plate showing John Haymaker's influence in design that developed in Shenandoah County. This pistol is the most extraordinary American pistol in existence as far as I'm concerned. And its origin is related to the Haymaker Lauck tradition. I'll show you the design of that later. But I was fortunate enough to be able to buy this pistol back in 1981. It was owned by a Texas millionaire, and the oil business was going bad, and he was also in a bad divorce. So the two things made it. And so I bought the pistol for $18,500, and that was the interest rate on a 90-day note. And I got a 90-day note because I didn't have the money. But I had a banker that was sympathetic to a person with this disease of collecting. And so, you know, it's a fantastic looking pistol. It's got a silver inlay on the top of the barrel, and it's engraved by a different hand than the gun maker, and it says General Duncan MacArthur. Well, Duncan MacArthur was made General of the Northeast Defense during the War of 1812, succeeding William Henry Harrison. I believe that this pair of pistols were not made singly, they're made in pairs, by the way. You don't often find them together. But I think these pistols were probably Harrison's gift to him. I don't know that for a fact, but anyway, MacArthur ended up being, in 1834, governor of Ohio, and this pistol descended in a good MacArthur family in Iowa, and years ago was in a very big collection. A lot of people didn't trust the engraving on the barrel because it was a different hand. The General Duncan MacArthur was a different hand, but you'll find out more about that in a moment. So what's extraordinary about this pistol, not only is its beautiful decoration and very fine maple, there's the Duncan MacArthur signature. It's a concealed double barrel, one over the other. And we had that x-rayed. Cannot figure out how he made that barrel. It's quite perfect from end to end. I had it at a show early on, and a North Carolina collector came up and he says, "I heard you paid a ridiculous price for a pistol." And I said, "This is it." He's looking at it, he says, "Why in the hell would you pay that much?" I said, "Look at the muzzle." Oh my God. You know, so and by the way, this concealed barrel, the only other place I've ever seen it is in 17th century Italian pistols, so you figure it out. But it's an extraordinary example. Inside the lock, you can see a cylinder at the bottom of the pan, right here. That's for the bottom touch hole, and this is for the top touch hole. Everybody see that? Nobody's responding.
Yeah. Is that fired as a volley pistol?
You can fire it a single shot at a time, or you can fire both at once. Okay, I'm going to make sure I get the right button here. I'll stop this whole lecture. There you see the arm of the pan is fake, right here. It goes back up here, and it looks like a regular flintlock. This rotates it down. When this is all the way down, you're loading it and firing both shots simultaneously. I mean, that just shocks your world that somebody in the backcountry of America is making. The tang carving is line for line John Haymaker's and subsequently Simon Lauck's. And there's the three lobes that I talked about, the overlapping scroll with the flame coming out. And they use a radius gouge. Winchester uses 4 different gravers, and that's more than any other rifle shop that I know. And so that's a radius graver that lobes on those leaves are done with. And I don't know who the initials are on the. So when I owned this pistol, I had a volunteer who I put working on Duncan MacArthur, and she got on the internet and tried to find out if we could find any connection between William Henry Harrison, and was very unsuccessful. But 10 years later, she got an email. The man that owned the pair to it. Last time the pair sold was over $250,000. That was the mate, and we were able, because of the family histories, to go back when it was willed and parted about 150 years ago. So it's great fun and privilege to work with this kind of material, and somebody to pay your way to do it. But basically, a lifetime in a museum, you don't have a really great retirement unless you invest cleverly. So this one was owned by William DuPont when I photographed it. It's the finest Simon Lauck that I know of in existence. And guess what? It turned up in England. That's in much more high relief than his usual rifles, and just a really great rifle. And see the wire, that gadrooning, comes like it comes out of the tang. That's silver wire. And John Sheetz in Stanton, when he left his shop in '96 and set up in Stanton. He grew up in Stanton. That's a lower Gusler County family. He put silver wire in as veins in all the carving. As a militia captain told the governor in a letter, John Sheetz is as grand a genius as the world affords. That's a quote. You don't often find out about it. He also patented a nail machine and some kind of saddle. I never have gotten into what those were about. And that militia captain was also ordering a rifle from him. And he said it had a spring bayonet. He was ordering a spring bayonet like you see on some British pistols. I've never found another Kentucky rifle, but we got a reference to that. This is one of the J. Locks, John and Jacob. They're hard to separate. Simon died in 1815. John Haymaker died in 1804. He died pretty young. And after John Haymaker died, the quality of the Lauck shop decreases drastically. And you see this facsimile of the original carving. It almost looks like a stamp was used. And that's beautiful, clean work, but boy, the times are changing. One of the nice things that they did was this interrupted forestock molding for the inlays and the, let's see, that one's got the draw loops. These are John Haymaker's pair of silver-mounted pistols. Again, they're in absolute superb condition. Just really the finest. And the pieces of maple are book matched. They were cut out as a thicker piece and then made as a set. These are still owned by a descendant of the original purchaser. We're moving to Strasbourg. Henry Harding and Jacob Funk, when they left in '96, they went back to Strasbourg, which was their home, and had a partnership for 2 or 3 years. They're listed in the tax records as partners. Anyway, this rifle, unfortunately, was restocked in the 1830s, but it's got a silver plate that's about 10 inches long, and in block letters, it's signed in a serpentine, block letters, made for John Royal by Jacob Funk, Virginia State, 1796. So it was his masterpiece for some wealthy guy, and it must have been an extraordinary rifle. But and so I'm glad that that part survives, at least. You see where the side plate was shortened for the later Lauck, and they cut through the engraving. No carving. All the mounts are engraved as I described earlier. I don't know much about Daniel Funk. It's a kind of an unfortunate juxtaposition in today's light, defunct. But a beautiful pistol with nice mounts and the silver draw loops. You see silver wire and sheet and combination on it. An early Virginia pistol that had a brass wire-shaped side plate stocked in walnut. I'm relating it to that group, but this could be different places in the Shenandoah Valley that was produced. George Fisher apprenticed to Jacob Funk. He was born in Pennsylvania, but he was 16 years old when the partnership broke up, and he was in the tax records with Jacob Funk thereafter, so we know he didn't apprentice to Harding, he apprenticed to Funk in that partnership. Later, members of this family moved to Lynchburg and had a shop there until 1926. And beautiful workmanship, Lauck's designs. There was also another George Fisher who was a basket maker because the tax collector had the same problem I did, identifying which George Fisher is which. But often you don't find a good, nice solution to that problem. His carving has some features in Haymakers, but not in Lauck's. That's interesting. But Haymaker was in Lauck's shop, probably as a foreman. We've got several shops in Harrisonburg, Virginia that had foremen. And they sent the foreman to Richmond to pick up the model. So these are not little small shops. Like I was saying with Martin Sheetz, there's 60-some, he's got the tools for having a great big crew. Simon Lauck was running 8 to 9 people on an average throughout the 90s. Henry Harding's, this is a miniature rifle made for either a young boy or a woman, and it's signed. And that pointing finger is used a lot in the early 19th century, and you see those on tombstones. Pointing. Inlays in the relief carving. very much classic Haymaker influence and all that style. And I just, on the rifle I'm doing now, I've got doing one of these toe plates. That's a corner cover escutcheon from Birmingham, England, and that design is modified from, and that sometimes was the inspiration they had, was brass mounts that are being imported with different decorations on them. Frederick Sheetz in Hampshire. This is the finest rifle I know made by him. Frederick Sheetz was paying taxes in Frederick County. He was fined for not going to muster from 1790 until 97, 98. He owned a horse. He knew Simon Lauck personally. I think he was in that shop as a journeyman. And so in 98, he pays taxes in both counties at one year, and then he's over in Fort Ashby, which was called Frankfort at the time he moved there. It's across the river almost from Cumberland, Maryland. He was a fine rifle maker, and during the War of 1812, he set up a production line and was complaining about the wages given by Harper's Ferry and Springfield and hiring workers. And he would get simultaneous contracts for 60 rifles and then overlap. And he pointed out to the governor that he wanted a new contract so that he could put the workers around the parts they're making now on the next contract and be more efficient for him and for the state. So he was running a big business. He's the only rifle maker I've ever found anything on that used the term octagon for the barrel, the proper term. But in the 18th century, they just call anything with facets squared. So they call the octagon barrel squared. You buy 3 square files at the store. They call them 3 square because they're triangle files. And so you have to get used to the language. But that's a fabulous rifle. The forestock molding is filed right, works right through those inlays. Another Frederick Sheetz. And it has the typical Winchester hidden latch up here on the hinge, but this little guy's head and arm is pointing toward the toe of the stock to trick you into thinking it's the push button is in the bottom of the stock. And I've seen one Frederick Sheetz and one Simon Lauck that had a fake push button, and when you pushed it, it pricked your finger. and the one guy that owned it said he took it out because it was seriously injuring people. You know, that steel spike in there. About as elaborate as you see an American rifle get. There's repeats here of his work. Excuse me. It's got wire inlay on top of the comb. Here the acorn inlay is separate from the sheet of the toe. That's probably just an expedient because he didn't have a long enough piece of brass. This is one of his contract rifles, the inscription that's on top of the barrel. He made those stamps himself, and he wrote to the governor and said he had made the stamps and that they were 10 cents each. He gets $15 for that rifle, $15. And making those stamps by hand was 10 cents each. And he said that he could mark other, he was trying to get more work to mark other. And whoever stamped that left out part of Hampshire. But, you know, you're doing 50 or 60 rifles. We've got a lot on Frederick Sheetz's life. It's extraordinary. This is a military rifle.
Is this Hampshire County now West Virginia? Is that Hampshire is?
Hampshire County is West Virginia today, yes. It's a really old county, though. It's a real early county of Virginia. But, you know, the Civil War divided the state. And Frederick Sheetz lived just barely. He died right before the cavalry came in and burned his mills. He didn't have to see that.
Which cavalry?
Excuse me?
Was it Union or Confederate?
I'm not sure they knew. It may be somewhere, but I did find a reference to that. And years ago, a woman wrote me that had his Bible, and that's now lost. But he, you know, Otho and Zebulon, gun makers, in this, I call it the Hampshire County Frederick Sheetz dynasty, because there's several dozens of rifle makers that he set up out there, and they continued right into the middle and late 19th century. But Otho and Zebulon I thought they were his sons, but in the family Bible, he said that his family, it was 1809, his family got a con pox, and then he named the people who were stricken with it, and he said his nephew, Otho. And so those genealogies are complicated, and you don't, if you find something like that, it unravels a little edge of it, but you know, sequentially it looks like they're his sons in the tax records. But no. And when they taxed in 1815 for the War of 1812, Frederick Sheetz had a lot of taxable property, like metallic clocks and things like that. They made a special tax record all over Virginia for paying for the war. And Otho and Zebulon were not living as grandly as Frederick. And he had set up a barrel boring mill, and he had other mills, sawmill and grist mill. He was a very good businessman, and he wrote a beautiful letter. I've read about 25 or 30 of his letters from 1808 to 1815. It took me about 10 years to read the governor's correspondence over that time, going to Richmond and looking through the original documents of the governor's papers. And he got into, one guy accused him of cheating the state and making inferior firearms a major in Hampshire County. And so a big dispute, and there was a legal thing going on. And Frederick Sheetz went to this muster 50 miles from his home to address this, and the government set up a person to represent the gunsmith and represent the purchaser. And the captain that was making the complaint didn't show up for the meeting. It gives you a hint. And Sheetz wrote back and said they found that the guns that had been burst were loaded with an excessive charge, tied to a tree, and set off with a string to the trigger. And that's how he burst the guns. And then he said the stock damage was because they were 50 rifles were thrown loosely into a wagon and traveled upwards to 50 miles over rough mountain roads. So it's a different world. But Frederick Sheetz wasn't guilty of trying to cheat anybody. He starts off with 3 different people in Hampshire County writing him that he was a very ingenious mechanic, had a large and growing family, and was very poor. By 1815, he's listed as Frederick Sheetz Esquire in the tax records. So this is, you saw that flintlock that he made this is one of his sporting rifles made during the contract period. He's making rifles for customers as well. And I think this is one of Michael Sheetz' Laucks. It's signed Frederick Sheetz, and there's the flintlock. It's much more academic and much better made than the other one. And the lock is signed. I don't think after 1820 he was doing much gun work, but I don't know that for a fact. That's hard to. And this is just a group of different Hampshire people This particular box finial came out of the Lauck shop. I'll go through these quickly. The George glaze is important. It's dated 1804. It's got these metal inlays in it. I saw this in a family in Hampshire County, and she didn't want to sell it. I photographed it. And she said, "What should I do with this when I die?" And I said, "Well, consider giving it to Colonial Williamsburg." And so around 1803 or 4, Eric Goldstein, who had the position I used to have, called me up and said, "This lady walked in with this great rifle that you asked her to give to Colonial Williamsburg. You never know." But look at all that metal inlay. It's just a gorgeous signature. But it's dated 1804 in that oval. And he's just walked out of Frederick Sheetz' shop. All the art is Frederick Sheetz dead on. It's really a kind of amazing document. Same box finial, those acorns with the stems. And his engraving is a little different. I heard a rumor was published that he learned in Old Town, Maryland. But George Glaze moved to Indiana and put guns out there, and then he came back, and he was moving all over the place. But this is the earliest piece by him, and we don't have many rifles dated in this period, so it's good to have that confirmation. And the patch box has got a compartment for the grease, and different from the, it's sort of special rifle all the way around. And it's still in the black, and you can see all the carving has got the thick build-up. That silver is really tarnished. This is our standard George Glaze. Very prolific man. This is a signed pistol by him. George Young produced, there's just a whole group of makers out there in that county. I've seen a pistol by George Young. This is sort of 1850, and this Roman nose stock is getting rather awkward, and the traditional trade is starting to wane, is understandable in that later period. And this is an unusual patch box under the cheek piece. There's about, I've seen maybe a dozen of those from Hampshire County. They are all seem to be post-1830. I'll show you this one great rifle from Shenandoah County, and we'll take a break. Christian Hoffman, in 1782, his father-in-law gave him a lot and house. I don't know what his father-in-law's trade was, but I suspect that he was a successful apprentice who married the daughter. But the deed just says for the love and affection he has for him. And he gave him this lot, so it's, he has finished his apprenticeship during the Revolution. He made this glorious rifle, and it's the only intact rifle known by him. And he's one of the first of the inlay in the patch box finial is silver. So he's one of the first to put these things together. And the inlays flanking the side plate are really unusual. But he is a fabulous carver. And his signed rifle identifies a rifle that's revolutionary in Windsor Castle. That's an extraordinary early carved rifle. It's from this Woodstock group. Very delicate, free-flowing, and every amount is engraved. You can see the engraving on the top of the butt plate. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll proceed after the break.